Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Braden. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And that is, of course, Stephen Lassan, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. That's your cue that it's an SEC After Dark. Stephen, how's it going, my friend?
Mike, it is going great. We have reached August. Fall practice in full swing. It's almost here, my friend. I'm fired up for some football. Let's get week 0 and week 1 here as fast as possible because I'm ready to see some actual games at this point.
Right. This season is just about done, but we're not done just quite yet because we got a couple more to talk about, Stephen. Again, I credit you for coming up with a show topic for today's show. We're going to be talking about the biggest breakout candidates for every single SEC team. I have almost multiple for every team. I got at least one guy for every team, Stephen. I'm curious to know where you went with your list. Again, he's not shared his. I've not shared mine. So we're venturing this all in it together. So we'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to ask you, Stephen. Oh, there's old Cousin Shane in the comments. Appreciate you, Cousin Shane. But so we had something come out. It's not official yet, but it was John Talty and was it Alex Scarborough, I think, for CBS Sports reported that the SEC is going to roll out injury reports. Again, that's not official yet, but it's looking to be like it will be for this football season. And if I read the report correctly, Stephen, they said, I think they've already started to do something like that in the Big Ten. Can you share what you know about that and just your thoughts on if the SEC does go to an injury report, how will that change things?
I think it's a great move. Personally, I think it's past due. And especially in this era of college football where there's sort of like a professional tint to it, especially with NIL and compensation that's coming with the House settlement. But you can look back at what the Big Ten and the ACC has done this too. They did availability reports. Like basically before kickoff, they would have guys who are out and kind of questionable. There's different ways to do it. Each conference can kind of carve their own path here. But I think one thing that you could look at in a positive is some of these coaches could say, I want to put this report out so people stop asking people behind the scenes about betting information and asking players and all that. It's just out there in the public. The other thing that's crazy to me is all these coaches are like super secretive about injury information, and the NFL is, wide open about it. Doesn't seem to bother those coaches or, level of play at all. So I guess I've never understood like the paranoia and the secrecy all the time about these things. I think any kind of transparency around these things is good. And it also just sort of like for fans, it clarifies who's going to be in every week, who's going to be out. Even if it comes out on Saturday morning, it's better than no information and trying to guess who's going to be playing. We don't have the Will Levis situation where we find out like during the week and the betting line all of a sudden moves. So those things might not exist if this goes through, which I think it should.
And they'll never say this in a million years, Stephen. I don't think, at least the SEC won't. But a lot of this has to do with what you just hit on there, gambling.
Yeah.
And the fact that the betting public, who may not be diehards, you listen to this show, you're an SEC diehard, but there's many people out there that are not, that are casual people that they don't want to bet on Alabama if Jalen Milroe mysteriously, right before kickoff, they announce he's out. You know what I mean? Like it's much more difficult, and by virtue, what they're really saying is people are hesitant to bet on college football as opposed to NFL, where there is this structure. So that is, I think, the driving force behind this. Would you agree?
I agree with you. And I also think you've seen some chatter from, like, I think Steve Sarkisian and maybe Lane Kiffin that you could find coaches and programs if you don't put out correct information. And I think it's one of those cases like with the Big Ten and ACC, like you kind of see as every coach and program was in on it. Like the SEC with the 16 coaches, the 16 programs, they all agreed to do this. I think it would be, for transparency's sake and just overall data and information, it'd be good for us fans and certainly for us analysts looking to see who's in and out. But certainly I think betting is definitely gambling driving a lot of this and sort of just being a little bit more open about that information.
And shout out Cousin Shane in the comments here, Stephen. He says, we're going to provide an injury report for the show, just in case anyone's curious. We're not trying to hide anything. Shane says, I'm day to day with high blood pressure and a left knee problem, especially if it's raining. So I appreciate you, Cousin Shane, we're way ahead of the SEC here. But
I've got a bad foot that it takes, like, when I hobble down the stairs, I got to walk like sideways. So yeah, it'll be questionable, but likely to play. So.
Hey, one last thing, Stephen, before we get into, again, we're going to be talking breakout candidates all across the SEC for each and every single team here. Just wanted to get your quick thoughts. Shane and I already covered this on the last episode, so we don't have to go too long on this. But the debut preseason coaches poll has been released. If you're just listening in the audio format tomorrow, I'll give you a quick rundown here. Georgia, number one in the country, and by far and away. I believe they got 47 first place votes. The next closest was Ohio State, who had only 7. So a massive, massive gap between 1 and 2. Texas, number 4. Alabama, number 5. Ole Miss, number 6. Missouri, number 11. LSU, 12. Tennessee, 15. Oklahoma, 16. Texas A&M, 20. And then these teams, not officially in the top 25, but they were found in the others receiving votes category. Auburn, number 32. Kentucky, 37. Florida 38, and South Carolina 39, which means Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt were not found in the others receiving votes category. Stephen, anything jump out to you on this debut coaches poll?
I think the first thing is the strength of the SEC this season. 6 of the top 12 and 9 of the top 20 reside in the SEC this year. That is insane to think about. Half of the league is a top 20 team, according to the coaches poll. Hard to disagree with that. Personally, I think Tennessee and Texas A&M are just a little bit low. No real surprises in sort of the teams that didn't get votes: Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. A little bit surprised South Carolina got some consideration at, kind of basically the 39th with the others receiving votes. But I think the first thing that jumped out to me was just the strength that the coaches poll is sort of, projecting the SEC to have this year. And then also the fact that, no surprise, Georgia overwhelming number 1. I would agree with that, but also think that even at number 6, I like Ole Miss ahead of Alabama, and think Tennessee and A&M might be a little low at 15 and 20.
And shout out Till Valhalla. I love this comment. He says, I'm just happy and he's talking about Tennessee here, obviously. We're playing all the NA teams here: Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. I didn't think of that till now, but that's quite the comment there.
Mike, I think that's actually a really good point, because if you think about how scheduling is going to work in the 16-team and the 18-team Big Ten conferences, like, who you play and who you don't play is probably going to mean a lot in the race for the conference title. It's not crazy. I mean, this is going to sound somewhat crazy to suggest this, but it's not crazy to think that the 2 best teams in the SEC will not be playing in Atlanta at the end of the year. Like the Missouri with a great schedule, Tennessee with a pretty favorable schedule. Somebody, and it may not be 2024, it may be 25 or 26, but the scheduling of who you miss and who you play is going to loom even bigger than it did in the SEC with divisions, I think.
Right. Hey, real quick, Stephen, we got a donation. Appreciate your cousin Judah here. He says, let me play a little sound effect for you. You give us a donation, we'll answer any question you got. Will Arkansas win 9 games if they have a top 25 defense? So again, will the Razorbacks win 9, Stephen, if they have a top 25 defense? I've thrown up their schedule. 9, I mean, the over-under is 4.5 here, guys, so 9 might be shooting a little high, but I think Missouri, I think their over-under was 5.5 last year. They won 11. So, again, take that into consideration. But what do you think, Stephen? Can Arkansas win as many as 9 games if they have a top 25 defense?
Potentially. I'm looking at that schedule, and I'm trying to use last year's scoring defense as a guide here. Missouri was 25th nationally, and they gave up about 21 points a game. So that's sort of the range, I guess, you'd kind of look at where Arkansas could go. And I think if you're saying that Arkansas has a top 25 defense, then probably all of a sudden, like your swing games, the ones against Oklahoma State, Auburn, even you get Tennessee, LSU, Texas, and then of course there's the season finale at Missouri. Some of those look a lot more winnable. I think it's a long shot, but I think if you're telling me that Arkansas has a top 25 defense, I'm also guessing that the offense also took a big step forward. I would probably say in that scenario, that probably is more likely to get Arkansas to somewhere probably closer to 8-4. I think 9-3 might be too steep, even if with a much improved defense. And Mike, I think we should also note too. I mean, I thought Arkansas defensively was a lot better last season at the start of the season, and they kind of tailed off a little bit at the end. So I think that's where you could see some of those transfer additions, just having better depth this year, could pay off, especially when you get Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri in the second half of the season, basically.
Let that be a lesson to you all. Hey, we appreciate every donation we get. But if you want to give us 20 or more, Stephen would have said 9, 10, 11 wins. No problem. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm kidding, of course. But no, I appreciate the insight there, Stephen. I agree 100%. I mean, again, we should be trying to make a bowl game here. Not what's the path to almost making the college football playoff. Not to say that Arkansas fans year in, year out should be happy with a bowl game, but given this damn gauntlet they got here, it's going to be tough. But thankfully, every tough home game, the vast majority of the toughest games are at home, short of Missouri and perhaps A&M. Again, I think A&M. Who knows if they're really the top 20 team that they are currently ranked. We'll see in Oklahoma State, but they're not in the SEC, so I don't got a respect for them, Stephen. I'll just put it quite plainly.
That is a very difficult schedule for a program that's dealing with a lot of transition and a coach on the hot seat. But also, if you're telling me that Arkansas has a top 25 defense by the end of the year, I'm going to guess that they probably played pretty well at Oklahoma State, and all of a sudden a game that Arkansas is an underdog in looks a lot more favorable in trying to get to that 6-win mark, which I would agree. Like, that's the goal for me for Arkansas this season: get to 6 wins, get to a bowl game, and you sort of kind of reset that foundation a bit for Sam Pittman in 2025.
Right. All right, Stephen. So let's get into it. Biggest breakout candidates, and as always, throw us a donation. Let us know who your team is, and we'll bump them all the way to the top of the list. Otherwise, we're going to go in alphabetical order. And for 5 Adam here, he says, roll tide, roll. So let's do Alabama, Stephen. Who you got as biggest breakout candidate for the Crimson Tide?
So I should probably add my qualifier to the breakout candidates, which they are always in the eye of the beholder, because what is a breakout to one person may not be a breakout to another person. So maybe I might be a little too deep in the weeds, but we're going to go there for Alabama. Mike, I got a couple of good ones, I think. Let's start at running back. I like Justice Haynes. The buzz that last season that we heard before the season, he only had 25 carries. Roydell Williams, Chase McClellan had something to say about that. Haynes and Jam Miller, they're going to be the 1-2 at running back for Alabama this year. Also, don't think that, Kalen DeBoer, certainly, I think his reputation working with quarterbacks and receivers, no doubt about it, that they're going to, I think, take a step forward in the passing game this year. But they had a 1,000-yard rusher at Washington last season. So I don't think they're going to completely forget about the run game, and that's where Justice Haynes could step in. I'm going to be maybe a little bold here. I'm going to take Ryan Williams at receiver. I think the 5-star recruit, the talent, the impact, we've kind of already heard some buzz from him in fall practice. But also, I think for a coach in Kalen DeBoer coming into his first season at Alabama, Ryan Williams was his big get on the recruiting trail. And what better way to sort of make that statement on the recruiting trail, kind of show the new era, than to play him right away and to have him shine. So I like Ryan Williams, Justice Haynes, and I'll take a defensive back. I don't know if it's Keon Sabb, Mbakwe, or Xavier Brown, one of the 2 freshmen. So those would be my 3 breakout candidates for Alabama this year.
Right. And again, I didn't put any qualifiers or any parameters on Stephen when he came up with his list, but I do have a couple that I kind of stuck to. I tried to pick guys that Stephen may not pick. I leaned heavily away from quarterbacks like a Nico, like a Jackson Arnold. I don't know if Stephen went down that road or not, but those seemed a bit obvious to me. And I really tried not to pick transfers because, again, I think people get tired of me saying this, Stephen, but I think we overhype transfers. It's usually year 2 that a transfer really is a huge breakout star. So again, I've got a couple transfers, but I tried not to pick those type of guys. But I did have to pick Ryan Williams too.
Yeah.
All the buzz we heard at media days, we're hearing it already in camp from Kalen DeBoer. It sounds like they've got themselves one hell of a receiver in the freshman. That was a 5-star. Now, let me ask you this, Stephen, because I asked Cousin Shane the same exact thing on the last episode, but does the fact that Ryan Williams may have again, I don't know if he's going to be the number one. That's probably way too much expectations right out the gate. But just the fact that he is already being talked about as a contributor, let's say a key contributor, which that may be going just a step too far, but however you want to shake it out, does it give you any cause for concern that Alabama, now under Kalen DeBoer, again, could be one heck of a coach, but it's not Nick Saban. They'll never have it as good as the greatest of all time. Does it concern you that a true freshman's right here already being considered as a factor, or does it more give you, expectations that we just got one heck of an amazing freshman?
To give you a little bit of a bad answer, it's probably a little bit of both, because I sort of look at the group and sort of like the totality of it. If Ryan Williams is as good as we think he is, if Jeremy Bernard transferring in from Washington, he knows the scheme, he's very familiar with Kalen DeBoer. If he sort of steps in there, Kobe Prentice averaged over 17 yards a catch last season in limited time. That could be a pretty productive trio. And of course, they're without Jalen Hale for a good bit of time. I also think, too, from a coaching perspective, I think Jamarcus Shepard, the receivers coach for Alabama, is one heck of a receivers coach. And I think he's better than Holman Wiggins, who, of course, who's at A&M now. So I think talent development might be better here for Alabama. But certainly, I think when you lose Jermaine Burton, Isaiah Bond, Amari Niblack to Malik Benson, I was kind of lukewarm on this group back in the spring. I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic now. So it is kind of a little bit of both. It's that I think he's a really ultra talented player, but there are some areas. This is certainly a group where I think you have an opportunity to step up because of so many unknowns coming into the year.
Right. And 5 Adam notes, Jerry Jeudy played as a freshman, Devonta Smith, Ruggs, and I think also Waddle played as a freshman too. So again, you can be that and just be outstanding, but I don't know. That's a little bit concerning for me. But again, we're saying maybe the best receiver freshman in the country. There's another one on my list that we'll get to, maybe the second best in the country. But again, I just think that's a fair question to ask. And the other one I have for Alabama, Stephen, it didn't make your cut. You said running back. I was like, uh-oh, he's going to steal my guy here.
Yeah.
I got J.M. Miller.
All right.
I believe won A-Day MVP. But just the fact that we've got multiple running backs we just referenced gives you an idea of how loaded the Crimson Tide should be at that position, and what a wealth that Kalen DeBoer's walking into when he took over this Alabama roster. This is going to be far and away. I mean, it's not even close, talent-wise, what he's going to have to work with this year than he's ever had in his career. So I personally, I can't wait to see what they make of it.
Yeah, same here, Mike. I mean, I think the thing that jumps out to me right away is what does Jalen Milroe look like in this offense? I think we saw the tools and the skill set last year. I think you expect him to take a step forward. And also with that, there's a lot of turnover here. You're talking your top 2 running backs from last season. 4 out of your top 6 pass catchers are gone. But at the same time, if you're an Alabama fan, very easy to get excited. We mentioned it, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, and of course they brought in a couple transfers at tight end to sort of boost that stock. But and also throughout the offensive line for Alabama, I mean, Caden Proctor was kind of working with the second team earlier this fall. He's now working his way back up to first team, just to see how far some of these pieces are going to grow for Alabama under Kalen DeBoer is a really interesting storyline. And if it all comes together, there's a ton of firepower here with all the skill talent like we've mentioned so far.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about this one, Stephen? Appreciate the donation from Cousin Justin here. How many atop will Cousin Shane a pop when the Gators upset the Vols all Rocky Top? Chomp, chomp. Cousin Shane, if you're still in the mentions, I can't believe you've not combated this man here, but we appreciate you, Justin. And for that one, we're going to throw the Gators to the top of the heap here. If you want your team thrown to the top, again, give us a donation like Justin. So who you got for the Florida Gators, Stephen?
Let me ask you this question as a judge. Give me a good ruling on a breakout player for Florida. Eugene Wilson. Is he known? I think he's known among SEC fans, but maybe you could make the case that he's a breakout star nationally this year. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair, but I wouldn't include him because I feel like
Yeah.
he's already kind of broken out.
Agree. So I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to go with a freshman running back for Florida. Jaden Baugh was sort of the buzz for Florida in the spring, and now even more critical for Florida with Montrell Johnson being banged up. I would suspect that he's going to be back to 100% at least some point early in the year. But we do know Billy Napier loves to rotate his running backs, likes to give a lot of guys carries. I think Jaden Baugh, as a true freshman, has a chance to make a kind of an impact right away in that first game against Miami. So I'll take the freshman running back there. And I will also take a transfer on the other side of the ball. I think Pup Howard could really be a key piece for this Florida defense. He was a top 10 linebacker recruit coming out of high school, had about 19 tackles at South Carolina last season. We know Florida needs help against the run. Here's a physical linebacker going to give that defense some pop in the defensive front this year. So give me Jaden Baugh and Pup Howard as breakout players for Florida this year.
Well, once again, Stephen, you picked a running back, but I think you picked the wrong running back. But no, I get, and Jaden Baugh, I think was he the one? I think he was committed to Arkansas. Tennessee tried to get him. Bama tried to get him. So again, I think that's a heck of a selection. I'm kind of kidding here, but I think that guy's going to be Trey Webb, who played a little bit last year. Now we've got the unfortunate news, Montrell Johnson, a little banged up. I just saw an update, Stephen, that he was at practice. He was in a non-contact jersey, but did not have any kind of brace on his knee. Montrell Johnson I'm talking about here. So read into that what you will, but that's a good indication. But hopefully he's back on the field for week one, Miami, that critical game. But I felt like I had to put a running back here. Billy Napier loves to run the ball, so I'm going with Trey Webb, who we've seen just a little bit of. And then defense, again, maybe this is promising, Stevie. I considered Pup Howard, I really did. But I went with Joey Slackman, the Penn transfer.
Yeah.
I believe he was Ivy League defensive MVP last year. Very coveted transfer. Sounds like he is going to make an immediate impact, may even start. Now, they're pretty talented on the defensive line, so even if he doesn't start, I think Joey Slackman will make a big impact for the Florida Gators this year. But again, the fact that we got two different running backs, the fact that we got two different defenders, I think that's a good sign for Florida, that they've got a little bit more talent than people are outside of Gainesville realize.
I think you said something important there, which is talent on the defensive line. And I think anytime you're bringing in a transfer from the Ivy League and you're asking him to make the step up to the SEC, and I think Joey Slackman can do it, just based upon what we've seen from him from highlights in the Ivy League and also from the stat sheet. But also, he's not being brought in to be like a superstar from day one. Like, he can be just a rotational piece in the key games against Miami and A&M. They're deeper up front early in the season. Of course, the heat, getting guys snaps across the board is going to be important. So I think I like the call for Joey Slackman there. And I think if you're a Florida fan and Slackman and Pup Howard work out this year, you're looking at a defense that's got two potential difference makers coming into the portal and making an impact right away, which would be good news for Billy Napier.
Hey, update from Cousin Shane here, Stephen. He says, if Tennessee loses against the Gators this year, I will do a half marathon. We're going to clip this one, Shane. But, and I'm trying to, let's look at the date of that game real quick. I don't have it memorized yet, but Florida, Tennessee, October 12th. So we're going to live stream Cousin Shane's funeral, October 13th, if that actually happens, because I don't know if he could survive a half marathon. But wow, that's a bold bold promise there from cousin Shane.
I like the visual of Mike, like, sort of just live streaming from the track, just talking SEC ball while Shane's walking around, trying to finish that half marathon. So good
All
news,
right.
it might be cooler by then though, right?
Oh, well, that's true. That's true. It won't be quite as hot as it was
Yeah.
last year. All right, Stephen, how about we're going to go in alphabetical till we get another donation? How about Arkansas? What do you got as a breakout candidates for the Razorbacks?
I might have picked the wrong player here, but I'll throw him out anyways. I like Luke Haas as a breakout
Ooh.
player. Maybe to some extent he broke out last year. It's also one of those things that if you kind of were just paying attention from like a very big kind of big picture view of the SEC, you probably missed the fact that he had 16 catches for over 250 yards early in the season, and then of course got hurt and missed the rest of the year. So I'm kind of taking on this from the perspective of I think he sort of opened some eyes last year, but I think he's going to do that even more. Just being healthy, being sort of the focal point of that Arkansas passing game potentially. I think Petrino will find ways to get him the ball. So a little bit of a higher name than most, but I think Luke Haas is due for a breakout year. Also, give me Jalen Braxton at corner. Top recruit who came in and played right away. I think you look at his advanced stats from last season, targeted 29 times, allowed 12 catches, and just one touchdown. So I like what we saw from him as a freshman and think only better things are in store this year in year two.
Mm-hmm. Cousin Jordan says half a marathon in 2 hours or 2 days. I'm sorry. Okay. No, hey, Luke Haas, I love that selection. Stephen, I think he could be one of the best tight ends in the SEC this year. He was well on his way to be an all SEC freshman before he got hurt. But I actually went with a different tight end, believe it or not, Stephen. I went Varkey Gums, who was a transfer, I believe, from North Texas last year. Again, year two, I'm very big on these transfers year two. Based on everything I've heard, sounds like it's kind of clicked for him in this Bobby Petrino offense now that he's taken a step up. And for everything you said about Luke Haas, I agree 100%. But I wonder if the attention will be there to where Gums could free him up to make some plays. I certainly think Bobby Petrino and Sam Pittman are going to make a commitment to the run, which what's that going to lead to? Obviously, play action passes. So I think these tight ends are going to be a heavy, heavy emphasis for the Razorbacks this year. And with the league going more quarterback, receiver, I think it suits you personally. And a lot of these teams have a lot smaller linebackers too, Stephen, so they can play in these nickel situations. So I'm looking at someone like Tennessee, like an Ole Miss. It ground and pound could really work against those defenses. That may be the key for the Arkansas Razorbacks.
That's a great point, Mike. I also think Ty Washington at tight end. I mean, heck, Arkansas's got three pretty good tight ends this year. I mean, with Washington, Haas, and Gums. And to your point, I like the sort of the approach that Arkansas could take with ground and pound when you throw in the backs they have. And especially, I mean, I mentioned it before, but I really like Jaquinda Jackson. I thought he was on his way to being kind of an All-America type running back until he got hurt at Utah last season. So between that physical style of ball, and if Arkansas has got a much more physical and better O-line, I mean, like we said, things kind of look up if those things fall into place for Arkansas.
And then one more guy I got for the Razorbacks, Stephen. I got Isaiah Satania, the speedy receiver, kick returner. Year two for him. I think his growth in the game, based on what I've heard, I think he's far and away their best option as a returner. So look for him to make an impact there. I'm just curious to see. It was so hard to evaluate a lot of these receivers last year because, quite frankly, KJ didn't have time to throw the football more often than not. So, again, Arkansas returns more receiving production than any team in the entire SEC. That should really help Bobby Petrino and company get that passing game going. And if they can, I think Arkansas, again, a sneaky good team out here.
Yeah, no pressure, Taylon Green, being brought in to be the guy, and you've got a receiving core with that much production coming back, good running backs, and also sort of the Petrino, one of the top coordinator hires. There's a lot of pressure on Taylon Green's shoulders, and I think he can certainly deliver based upon what we've seen. Was there any defensive players for Arkansas that caught your attention for breakout potential this year?
Well, basically, whoever they throw out on the field at linebacker, again, I don't know if they're going
Yeah.
to be breakout is the right word, but they're going to be thrown into the fire. I would say that. So where are they at there? Maybe Sorey, the transfer from Georgia, but again, I mean, he may just play solely out of necessity. But that was kind of where I was at with that.
I think that's a great call, Mike. I know we always talk about with transfers, year two could be an impact, but he's also a guy that was stuck behind some really good players at Georgia and also an opportunity to step in and play right away at Arkansas, given the losses that they had from last season. So that one just seems like I don't know, top transfer impact or a breakout candidate. I think he fits both this year.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, how about Auburn Tigers? Where would you go there for breakout candidates for Hugh Freeze and company?
We'll start at receiver with a freshman. I think that's made plenty of buzz this offseason, and that is Cam Coleman. I think it is hard all the time to expect a significant amount of freshmen to come in and play right away at a high level. And of course, you worry about those guys hitting the freshman wall. But when you see the size and the physicality and the talent that Cam Coleman can bring to the SEC, some of those clips we saw in the spring, he just seems like he's ready from day one to make an impact. And I think the fact that he was an early enrollee, he's had time to adapt to the offense. He's had the summer, he's had the fall. I expect him probably to be a day one starter based upon everything, that kind of you're hearing out of Auburn. And I expect him to make a big impact this year. So I'll go with Cam Coleman on the offensive side. And on defense, I like two guys here. I like, Keldrick Falk along the defensive line, sort of second year through the SEC. 35 tackles last year, another offseason to get stronger in the weight room along the defensive front. And Kayan Lee at corner, 3 starts last season, 6 pass breakups. I think he's another guy, a young player I'm expecting to make the jump in year 2 with a lot of playing time available. Auburn losing a lot of pieces in the secondary. I expect him to be a big part of that in 2024.
Yeah, you nailed it, Stephen. I mean, you got all of mine. Cam Coleman, of course, you got to put him on any list like this. Um, who knows? He could be the best, not just freshman receiver, but overall freshman in the entire country based on all the buzz coming out of Auburn. So certainly throw him out there. And I was going to go Kendrick Falk on the defensive line, hearing a lot of good things about Auburn being better on the defensive side of the football. It's going to be interesting. We've kind of talked on this. We don't have to rehash everything we've already said this off season, but I was a little what's the word? Mystified, I guess, that they hired DJ Durkin, given that things kind of went sideways for him at A&M. Despite all the massive talent he had to work with, he doesn't have that talent at Auburn. So, what are the results going to be? I don't know. I hate just to keep bearing this coaching staff, but I guess that's exactly what I'm doing. But I'm a little concerned there, I guess, by that hire.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably not among my favorite coordinator hires. Like, it seems fine. It doesn't seem like overly inspiring. I think maybe the optimistic approach, if you're Auburn, is sort of I guess the harmony that is on the staff this year. Maybe everyone's sort of singing the same tune. It's a little better behind the scenes. I did think Auburn's portal strategy in the spring, bringing in those sort of 3 transfers to beef up the interior of the line, was kind of underrated. Maybe not, they may not have like a high level impact kind of guy there, but I think it's important to build some of that depth, especially with some of the offenses they're going to face. I mean, Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri in that stretch in September through October. So a little fortification of the depth is a good thing there for Auburn's defense.
And then one other guy I would mention real quick, Stephen, I think Jeremiah Cobb at running back. I think Jarquez Hunter may be the most underrated running back, not just the SEC, maybe the country. So I'm not certainly suggesting Cobb's going to steal his carries or anything like that, but you need multiple running backs in this league, and that's a guy that I continue to hear good things about. So I think his role could certainly be increased this fall.
Agree. And I think if you're Auburn, I was just looking at the numbers. Peyton Thorne, 134 carries last season. I think you want him to be a runner, but I don't think you want him to probably have that many this season. So With Hunter, I certainly think could be in contention for first team All SEC this year. But I'm with you, Mike. I think Jeremiah Cobb has been making some noise this offseason. It could be that number 2 running back to sort of share time, or at least give Hunter a little bit of extra rest and allows him to stay fresh later in the season.
All right, Stephen, where would you go for the Georgia Bulldogs breakout candidates?
Man, I've got so many, I think, for Georgia. There's so many like 4 and 5-star guys that you kind of forgot about that are ready to kind of take that next step. You asked a question last week with Georgia, and how do you replace Brock Bowers? And I don't know that you can replace Brock Bowers. You can kind of replace his production. So I'll go with Oscar Delp, an ultra kind of talented tight end who's been a reserve the last couple of years, 24 catches last season. Remember, he was the number 1 tight end prospect coming out of high school. Ben Urasek, I think, will play a large role at tight end too. But Oscar Delp seems to be waiting his turn and time to shine in 2024. I will also throw out a couple linebackers here. I think Jalen Walker, 5 sacks in limited snaps last year, about 250 snaps for Georgia's defense. I think Georgia's defense could use a little more havoc this year. And a guy like Jalen Walker, what we saw last year, could translate into a bigger role in 2024. And also Raylan Wilson at linebacker too. Like, it seems like the young sort of stars at Georgia's linebackers, CJ Allen and others, there's plenty of depth and competition there for guys to break out this year at linebacker for Georgia.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Stephen, because that's exactly where I went with CJ Allen, who, again, depending on what you hear, I don't think that they were unhappy with Dumas Johnson, who's now at Kentucky, but it was one of those situations where they were fine with him leaving because all the massive talent they had still on the roster. So CJ Allen, second-year player, look, I think he's going to be a superstar there in Athens, so he was right at the top of my list. But I'm fascinated to see Dylan Bell this year, the receiver, Stephen, and see what his role is in Athens. He started to come on late in the season. He was a big spark in that Tennessee game. And now with Ra Thomas giving the boot, with Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, of course, off to the NFL, there's going to be catches to go around. So I think Dylan Bell is a massive, massive breakout candidate, who a type of guy that he's probably not going to be on many preseason All SEC lists, but there's a good shot that he's there at the end of the season.
I think maybe fair to kind of characterize him too as one of the best all-purpose players in the conference. Over 150 rushing yards last year, contributes on returns. I think due for a bigger role this year. In general, it was putting this list together for Georgia was tough because there's so many good options of guys who are going to, I think, talent-wise could break through this year. I think I probably should have had CJ Allen on my list. Maybe I was looking a little too deep into the weeds for these Georgia players. I also think just in general, Mike, at receiver, I think you nailed it with Dylan Bell. It also feels like there's room for somebody else to come out of here and be a superstar this year on this team. Is that Dominic Lovett kind of taking the leap? Is it someone like London Humphreys, Colby Young? There's opportunity for catches with Brock Bowers and McConkey, like you said, off to the NFL.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, let's move on to Kentucky. And this, I'll be quite honest with you, Stephen, this is one of the tougher ones for me, just because it's a veteran team. Again, I try to stay away from obvious, trying to stay away from transfers. Brock Vandegrift is a slam dunk if you just want to go that way. Chip Trainum seems pretty obvious too. So I guess I would take one of those guys. But the only other one, and I believe he's a transfer too. I've tried not to take transfers, but again, a lack of options, in my opinion, Stephen. I went with Jamori Macklin at receiver. Just given the fact that Kentucky has some really good established receivers, I think it's going to free Macklin up to, just to make an impact with the Kentucky Wildcats, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was a 1,000-yard receiver at North Texas, and you throw him with Barry and Brown and Dane Key. Like, I think that Kentucky receiving core, like if you follow Kentucky or the SEC, I think you know kind of how good it is. But I think on a national level, I think that kind of trio is pretty underrated, just how good they could be this year. But I do think the obvious fit for Kentucky at Breakout is Vandegrift. I didn't go there. I really struggled with Kentucky, to be honest with you. I had to go with Chip Trainium. I just think it's sort of opportunity plus talent here. He's been stuck behind good running backs at Ohio State. I don't know that he's necessarily as good as Ray Davis, but as far as if he gets the number one workload, is he capable of getting to around 1,000 yards? Yeah, especially with this veteran offensive line that Kentucky brings back this year. So he was the most obvious pick outside of Vandergriff. If you want to maybe find another player, I would say look at the defensive line because of some of the injuries they've had this fall. Maybe someone like a Khalil Saunders, maybe does Keyshawn Silver breakout. There's opportunity there for somebody on Kentucky's defensive line to step up this year.
And maybe you can educate us, Stephen, for someone that came in from Ohio State, Tranium, the running back. Maybe a comp or anything like that. Why did he leave Ohio State? Just looking for more carries. I know they added Quinshaw Junkins, and they already have. Was it also their running back? I believe was projected to be an NFL player. He came back. So, what can you share on him?
Yeah, he's had a really interesting career path to Kentucky because he was at Arizona State to start his career, and then he went to Ohio State, and they were actually going to play him at linebacker. And then they had so many injuries, they had to move him back to running back, and eventually that's kind of where he settled. But, you kind of look at just his kind of career, like being, I think, about 230 pounds at Arizona State and Ohio State. Like that physical nature can play, certainly in the SEC. But I think kind of the story for him is he's really never had a chance to be the number one running back at his program so far. But he's been stuck behind guys like Travion Henderson at Ohio State, who are probably, like you said, going to be high NFL picks. So I think injuries have showed he is capable and has the potential to have a really nice season if he's the number one running back.
Yeah, interesting. And that's kind of the DNA of that Kentucky program. You know what? I don't want to say off-cast. That's probably too cruel. But just, guys that are overlooked and come to Kentucky and really made a name for themselves. So he should fit right into that culture.
Absolutely. I think there's something to prove. Hungry, like Brock Vandegrift this year, something to prove, stepping out after transferring from Georgia, and some of that, I think maybe a little bit under the radar Kentucky this year. And a lot of veterans, like you said. I mean, that was the first thing that jumped out to me when you looked at their projected starters for this year. I mean, it's a lot of juniors and a lot of seniors. So it's a very veteran team coming back, and they should have, I think, a couple years of experience in that system that hopefully for Kentucky it pays off for a jump and a critical year for Mark Stoops.
Shout out Slim. He says Kentucky had two quarterbacks clocking in, but they were not allowed to do anything. Shout out to the NCAA investigation team. All right, Stephen, how about LSU? Who's your breakout candidates for the Tigers?
I'll be super obvious, and I'll take Garrett Nussmeier. I think he's just due for a breakout year. We saw this last season, and even before when he played. I think the talent is there, that gunslinger mentality. I think now as the number one starter, he'll kind of hone in, sort of fine tune some of those areas that he needed to work on this offseason and take that big step forward. So I'm expecting a big year from Garrett Nussmeier. He's one of my breakout quarterbacks for this year. I also like Kyron Lacey. Somebody has got to catch passes for LSU with Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors off to the NFL. Kyron Lacey around 19 yards per catch as the number sort of 3 receiver last year. Also, a little bit of rapport with Garrett Nussmeier with 6 catches in the bowl game against Wisconsin. So I like the early returns on the Nussmeier to Kyron Lacey connection for LSU this year.
How about this name, Stephen? I continue to hear buzz. I don't think he's on anybody's radar outside of Baton Rouge right now. Running back Caleb Jackson. Because I know they got Josh Williams. They got John Emery. Seems like depending on what day of the week he's on the team, he's off the team, this, that, or the other. Massively talented. So maybe they won't need Caleb Jackson now that they kind of have some bodies there. But I'm just telling you, keep an eye on him. A freshman last year, I believe, made somewhat of an impact. But Caleb Jackson, name to know, I really do think. And if LSU's defense, Stephen, the thing that I hate more than anything, when I hear these people that do shows like, and I'm sure I'm just as guilty of it, but I've stopped doing it after watching Florida's defense the last couple of years. When they say, well, they can't get any worse, can they? Well, They've been saying that since Todd Grantham roamed the sidelines down there in Gainesville. It has gotten worse every year. So, yes, LSU's defense, I don't care. Every time you hear an LSU preview or an LSU breakdown, they say, well, our defense can't get anywhere. It can get worse. I'm not saying it will be, but I'm saying it can get worse. Trust me. But if it gets better, Stephen, I think it's because Jacobian Guillory, interior defensive lineman, Brian Kelly says this is going to be the next big defensive lineman at LSU. Take that step up. He's played a ton. Now he's going to be a starter. Continue to hear buzz about Guillory. If he's a man down there, then LSU that's the start. Because otherwise, I don't think they're going to be able to stop anybody on the ground.
Yeah, that was the thing when I was going through trying to figure out players for LSU's breakout this year was who on defense is going to step up, because it feels like it is so wide open. And we've talked this offseason about, Harold Perkins is the clear, like, obvious all SEC guy, but you kind of have to dig a little bit after that to find like other guys on the roster for LSU from a defensive standpoint who are going to make potential all SEC. I had PJ Woodland as a potential breakout name to know in the secondary, but Mike, I think Bo Davis as the defensive line coach, I was just having one of those flashbacks when he was at Texas and after the game against Iowa State, and there was kind of like a tirade that made the rounds on the internet as him just sort of tearing into the culture and the team and what they needed to do. And I'm looking at that defensive front going, if I got Bo Davis coaching me up for 12 weeks of the season, somebody's going to break out here. So I'm with you. I think somebody on this LSU front breaks out, and Guillory seems like a pretty solid pick for 2024.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, not seeing any donations. Throw us a donation. We'll put your team, throw them to the top of the list. But until then, how about them Ole Miss Rebels, Stephen? Where are you going breakout candidates for the Rebels?
Did you have any trouble with Ole Miss?
No, this was one of the easier ones for me.
Man, I actually had a hard time finding breakout candidates. It's sort of like Kentucky. It felt like they had a lot of established juniors and seniors on the roster. I mean, I could make a case, I guess, that Walter Nolan goes from being pretty good to like All-America good this year for Ole Miss. I kind of settled on Terry Perkins though for Ole Miss. I mean, you look back at last season, he was on the all-freshman team, 38 tackles, 3.5 sacks, sort of one of the homegrown players for Ole Miss defense. It just feels like at linebacker, he's ready to take that next step, and he's going to have extra help this year along the defensive line. So give me Perkins at linebacker for Ole Miss as a breakout star this year.
Yeah, that's exactly where I went for Ole Miss on their defensive side of the football, pass rusher extraordinaire. I think Perkins can be that, and now with the added help around him, defenses won't be able to key in on him. But one name, and I tried to convince Steven to put him on the Athlon All SEC team, but he's not even Steven's buying what I'm selling here. But I'm telling you guys, this guy's been around a while, so I don't want to say he's been written off, but maybe people just don't realize, what he can do. And I'm going, Ulysses Bentley at running back. Now the path is clear. I know they added about 26 transfer running backs this offseason in Oxford, but I still think Bentley can be that guy, that go-to. He's never come close to 1,000-yard season. He gets it this year, Stephen, with all the weapons Jackson Dart will have to work with. I think there's going to be a ton of ground work, lanes to run in for, and heck, Lane Kiffin loves to run the football more than he loves to throw, despite the narrative around him. But give me Bentley. I think he's one of the biggest breakout stars in all the SEC.
It's an interesting call. I like him to have a good season. I think my only hesitation was the 6,000 running backs that transferred in this offseason. Like Henry Parrish and others. Like, does Logan Diggs come back in November and give this team a little bit of a stretch? So, I think first of all, I think the setup of Ole Miss offense is just fascinating with Jackson Dart and the receivers. How does Lane Kiffin sort of mold this group? I think people sort of forget sometimes how much he loves to run the ball and how effective he's been throughout his career. I mean, heck, even at Florida Atlantic, Devin Singletary, who's, of course, he's been in the NFL, was incredibly prolific as a rusher there. So somebody, to use a bad phrase, like somebody's going to get like a lot of carries here, and Bentley's the one that makes the most sense. My only hesitation is I kind of feel like it might be by committee for Ole Miss this year, but if it is Bentley, then for sure he needs to be on a breakout list.
Yeah. All right. How about Mississippi State here? Now, you want to talk about a hard team to peg. I had to go transfers on this one. But actually, I did find one guy that wasn't. But where are you going for the Bulldogs?
I'll start on defense because I really had a hard time finding a couple players here from Mississippi State. There's a lot of opportunity for somebody to step up, but I went with Isaac Smith at safety. 15 tackles in limited snaps last year. He was one of the top recruits in Mississippi State's 2023 class. I think just with all the players that Mississippi State has lost, there's a new scheme. It's a fresh start for the all the defensive players. I think in his sophomore year, he could be a guy who really takes a step forward for this defense. I mean, the depth chart for this team is really wide open on both sides of the ball. And of course, you could pair him with Corey Ellington at safety, and you got a pretty solid pairing on the back end for Mississippi State. So give me Isaac Smith, and I would say pencil me in for a receiver outside of Kelly Akari. I don't know which one it's going to be. I wrote down Creed Whittemore, but I could maybe be convinced it's Kevin Coleman, the Louisville transfer.
Right. Well, our list is pretty much identical, Steve. I get Isaac Smith, everything you just said, big impact year 2 player. That was a huge win for Mississippi State on the recruiting trail, and the fact they got him to stay, I think, is great news. But I did go with Kelly Akari. Again, that may be a little bit of a cop-out, but I'm sure every Mississippi State fan knows that name already, but I would venture the vast majority of the SEC has no idea who that is. And in this offense, he's very likely to catch 100 passes just this season. Blake Shapen will need a number one go-to guy, and I think that's going to be a Kelly Akari.
Yeah, he is a field stretcher for Mississippi State. I mean, I will tell you, I watched a lot of bad UTEP football last year, and his ability to get downfield, he had 8 catches of 40-plus yards last year, 4 of 50-plus yards. So I really like his potential to take the top off the defense. And in an offense, the one like Jeff Lebby has, you need those guys to sort of take the pressure off some of your guys underneath. So I'm very high on Kelly Akari. I think he could be an all-SEC receiver this year.
Hey, how about Cousin Rick coming through as always? We really appreciate you.
Thanks, cuz.
Cousin Rick says predictions. Aggies record 5 sacks against Notre Dame to start the season, lead the SEC in sacks. By the end of the season, Ole Miss comes in second. Oh, man, these are pretty specific predictions, yeah. but I love it. And I don't know if you saw this, Stephen. We played it yesterday, but Shamar Stewart's, his goal this season, his prediction, that was he was going to get 15 sacks himself, and basically said Nick Scorton will be right there with him. So what are the odds that A&M leads the SEC in sacks?
Well, I think we could start with that Notre Dame game first of all, because they lost their starting left tackle in practice this week, and this is already a group that's replacing Joe Alt and Fisher, the 2 tackles from last season. So you're talking about taking 2 All-America tackles away, and the replacement is in, and now he's out for the year. So if I'm Notre Dame, I'm feeling pretty nervous going into Kyle Field with that crowd and that defensive line on that first Saturday of what they're going to be facing. But A&M led the SEC in sacks last year with 42. And you look at this group that they have coming back. I mean, I think it's a top 10 to 15 defensive line in college football with Scorton and Turner and Stewart. So I think as far as a prediction goes, I mean, that seems pretty reasonable to me. Don't you, Mike?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to be right there all season long. So where you got breakout candidates for the Aggies? Because I feel pretty confident in my selections, but I'm kind of curious where you went.
I was trying to also think like who could threaten A&M's at the top of the sacks, like maybe Tennessee with James Pierce. That's kind of, more like A&M might have the duo. I think Tennessee will have James Pierce in his production. But I think as far as breakout candidates, Connor Wigman. I know it's super obvious, but man, I am really excited about his potential in this offense. I think Colin Klein and his ability to get the most out of the playmakers that A&M has, I think Connor Wigman's going to have a breakout year. So I know it's super obvious, but he's my number one. I also think Ruben Owens. I think A&M's got depth at running back, but it seems like the talent level for Reuben Owens will take over at some point. So I like him to be way more involved than the 385 rushing yards that he had last season. And speaking of Mike, that defensive front, give me DJ Hicks, former five-star. He's going to play in the interior with Scorton. You've got Turner, you've got Stewart. That's a pretty formidable starting group. So I like DJ Hicks on the defensive side for A&M.
You know what's bad when we're just throwing in a 5-star late in the process?
Yeah.
We're like, DJ Hicks, throw him in there too. But again, I think for some reason, Stephen, some fans have it in their head that this is like a roster devoid of talent because of the guys that hit the portal when Jimbo was let go. Yeah, they lost some critical big names, but they added plenty too. And I went right there with Nick Scorton because that is an obvious one. I know I said I'm trying to stay away from transfers, but I have heard people say, not even Texas A&M people, Stephen, but I've heard people say that it was the number one class that Texas A&M signed. That was the year Scorton was a senior in high school too. And they said he's better than anybody that they signed. So, and that's, they got a bunch of, and some of them have left, some of them are still there. They think Nick Scorton's better than all of them. So, and he's from around there too. So it's just funny how you sign the number one class, but you miss the guy right under your nose. Well, he's back now. So I think he can be that guy that maybe most of the SEC knows that name, but the rest of the country may know it by the end of the year. If he's as good as they're hyping him up to be in this Mike Elko defensive system, could be an All-American type candidate. So that's why I went with Scorton there. And then you nailed the other one, Reuben Owens. I've said it before, Stephen. People are probably so tired of us talking about our dynasty out here, but that's the offense I'm using is Texas A&M. And I just love the versatility. I love how much running is in it. Colin Klein spoke today. We're going to feature that on the next episode of the show. But, they've got a three-headed monster down there at running back. But I think Reuben Owens may be the most talented of the three. I don't even know if he'll lead the team in rushing. I don't even think that's important because I really do think it's going to be split into thirds. But if there is one guy that separates himself, I think it will be Reuben Owens.
Yeah, and I think also a point that you've mentioned, you have to have more than one good running back to make it through the SEC. And also it also could come into play if you're trying to win those close games, close it out. How do you finish? You finish it by getting first downs on like third and short, running the ball, and here comes Reuben Owens and maybe a much improved A&M offensive line. I was thinking about Nick Scorton for a second because he had 10 sacks at Purdue last year. And I'm going, man, if you surround him with those guys at A&M, they were that's way better talent that he had at Purdue last year on a defense that struggled. Man, I mean, what kind of numbers could he put up with that kind of talent around him? So I've got him as a second team All-American this season. So I'm hoping to maybe get ahead of the hype and get him on there before he makes it this season because, man, he's going to have a monster year down in College Station.
Just stick with me here. This show's turned full Aggie here for a moment, but Shamar Stewart, let's say he gets 15 sacks, which, I mean, that would be insane. That would almost assuredly mean he's number one in the country. But let's just say he gets that. How many does Nick Scorton get if Shamar Stewart is getting 15?
I mean, he had 10 last year. I mean, I hate to say, probably right around there, like 12 to 15, right?
Yeah, I mean that's scary to think about. But you know who ain't scared, Stephen, of them Aggies? That's some Texas Longhorns. So appreciate you, cousin Alex. He says great content, like always, cousins. Hook up. So let's do Texas next, Stephen. Who are your breakout candidates for them Texas Longhorns?
I've got 3 players, Mike, and I feel really good about these. I'm going to go with CJ Baxter, number 1 at running back, kind of the 5-star, the crown jewel, the 2023 recruiting class. And we saw that he late in the season ran for 100 yards against a really, really good Iowa State defense last year. We know Jonathan Brooks got hurt. He and Jaden Blue kind of stepped in as the running backs the rest of the way. I suspect, they're going to use both, but to me, CJ Baxter is on the verge of becoming a star in the SEC. And I have 2 guys on defense that I really like. Anthony Hill at linebacker. We saw him last season, 67 tackles as a freshman. I think even better things are in store this year. Texas can figure out the best way to deploy him. And also Malik Muhammad at cornerback. Another key 2023 recruit, 4 pass breakups last season. I think he makes the jump to all conference cornerback this year for Texas. We saw Terrence Brooks transfer to Illinois. They've got the Clemson transfer stepping in at safety. Muhammad is going to be a very key piece of this secondary to be maybe the number 1 corner and go up against some of these good receivers that they're going to be facing this year.
And hey, shout out cousin Ricardo here. He's another Texas fan. $10. Appreciate you, cousin Ricardo. He says, long-time Longhorn fan. So excited to be joining the SEC. Looking forward to the Aggies choking the season away. So love the animosity there. But yeah, you stole mine, Stephen. But again, great minds think alike. Malik Muhammad was on my list. I've heard great things that he could be one of the best corners in the entire SEC. And Anthony Hill, I was certainly going to go there as well. He was a terror in that Alabama game. I mean, Jalen Milroe is still probably having nightmares of Hill coming after him down in Tuscaloosa. So, yeah, year 2, elite player, looking for an expanded role in I don't get it, Steven. So many people overlook Texas defense. You can easily make the case, I think, that Texas defense was better than their offense last year. That doesn't mean the offense was bad, but the defense was that good. I think they got maybe the best defensive coordinator right now in the SEC. So I look for that tradition to continue. But I went with the defensive side of the ball, and CJ Baxter cannot wait. I mean, all Steve Sarkisian does is make one NFL running back after another. So, next in a long line, I'm sure, down there in Austin.
Yeah, and also I think you could pencil me in for somebody at receiver. Like, figure out if it's Wingo or Bolden or Golden or whoever it ends up being this season. Isaiah Bond certainly I think will catch a ton of passes for Texas, but somebody out of that Texas receiving corps is probably going to be all SEC by the end of the year. I've picked Isaiah Bond, but somebody's got to break out here too.
And you better believe if they have any of those Alabama transfers, Amari Niblack, another one, if they have big seasons in Austin, fair or not, they're going to be selling on the recruiting trail.
Yeah,
we can develop you, get more production than Alabama. Even if the different coach, they'll leave that part out, but they'll just know, hey, there was their stats at Bama, here's their stats at Texas. You know what to do.
You can already see the graphic at the end of the season, right? The Alabama and Texas, receivers, tight ends on the All SEC team, and of course being Niblack and Bond, the former Alabama players. If they make it, that will only solidify it. So, man, yeah. By the way, I love the back and forth between the Texas and Texas A&M fans here, man. We've got all this to go, and it's not even September. That's in November. I can't wait till we get closer to this game and see these guys going back and forth in the comments.
Yep, and one more from cousin Jared. Appreciate you, cousin Jared. $5. Really appreciate you. He's a big LSU guy. We already did LSU, but had you seen these comments, Stephen? We played them on the last episode, but it was Will Campbell. They're all American left tackle. Maybe the first, or very likely will be the first offensive lineman taken. Could be the first player taken in the upcoming NFL draft. But he has come out and said, hey, 10 wins is not good enough. That's not the standard here. We're trying to win a national championship. I'm not asking you to sit here and guarantee it or anything like that, Stephen. But on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all, and 10 completely stunned, 1 out of 10, what level of surprise would you have if LSU, let's say, just made the Final Four? How surprised would you be, if at all?
I'd be somewhat stunned. So I guess put me in maybe like 7 on that scale, 6 or 7.
Would you say that to Will Campbell's face?
No, I wouldn't. Yeah. No, I think one thing that, as you were reading that comment, I think the thing, if I was an LSU fan, I would like that. Like, I think the fact that you've won 10 games and this is the SEC, the high level of play, I think you have to like the fact that that's not good enough. And I mean, Brian Kelly said it when he was hired, like, you're coming to the SEC to play the best, to play the best talent, to be in the best stadiums, and 10 wins is good, but it's not good enough at a place like LSU. You want to be winning national championships. I said this before, Mike. If Les Miles and Ed Orgeron can win national titles, Brian Kelly can too. I mean, he's a way better coach than both of them. So
Yeah.
I sort of like the fact that they're raising the bar there. But I think with the defensive questions that they have, I think, and this may not age well, I think it'd be hard for them to get to the Final Four this year. But being in the playoff, yeah, I think that's realistic.
Hey, well, this is one of the benefits of doing a live show here, Stephen. Cousin Thomas just informed us CJ Baxter just got injured 30 minutes ago, knee injury, getting an MRI. And I'm looking on Twitter, and that does appear to be the case. No known severity of it. So, man, hope for the best there. But yeah,
Man, it's tough.
even Chip Brown, that's a name most people know. He is reporting it as well. Our buddy Anwar Richardson apparently had that first. So, man, tough break there. Hopefully it's nothing severe.
Mike, if I think maybe if we kind of look at it from this angle, like what if it is something significant here for Texas? Like, what could it mean? I think first of all, you got somebody in Jaden Blue who can handle the workload right away, and let's hope it's not something that's super serious to keep him out for a long time. But either way, it adds a little bit more pressure on Quinn Ewers to deliver this year too. Maybe you ask a little bit more of him and those receivers, but also in general, being a third-year starter, you would expect him to be able to handle a little bit more of the offensive workload. So certainly hope that it's not a season-ending variety because of how dynamic Baxter could be this year if he's in there.
Yeah. All right, Stephen, how about Missouri? We haven't hit on the Tigers yet. Breakout candidates for Mizzou.
I'm going to start on offense. I think this tight end for Missouri, Brett Norfleet, has been overlooked a lot this offseason. And I realize with Luther Burden and Theo Wees and some of the other weapons that Missouri has, it's very easy to overlook him. But really solid freshman season last year, 18 catches. I think he's, like I said, he's been a little bit overlooked. With Cody Schrader no longer there, and I think Missouri, they've got good running backs still with Carroll and Noel. But this is Brady Cook's offense. And I think with the weapons on the outside, would not surprise me to see them ask a little bit more of him, which means they throw it more, which means just more opportunities for Brett Norfleet. So I really like him as a breakout candidate this year. Also, give me a pair of transfers. Caden Green, the transfer from Oklahoma, whether he's at tackle, whether he's at guard, trying to ignite the Oklahoma-Missouri rivalry here as we're live here, and also throw me Toriano Pride. I think obviously a big void in the Missouri secondary, some losses there. He was the top 10 recruit at corner coming out of high school. I think he can kind of step up and reach his potential here at Missouri.
Yeah, you absolutely nailed this one, Stephen. I went Brett Norfleet as well, number one on my list. Everything you just mentioned, he started to really make some plays last season. Showed he's SEC caliber here. Maybe one of the top 2 or 3 best tight ends in the SEC this season. I think if he continues to progress. And how about this name, Stephen? This may not be fair, or quite frankly, it may not be a wise choice, just because they got so many weapons to work with. But could have went either one of the running backs. Continue to hear great things about the transfer running backs, but I went Marquise Johnson, who came in as a freshman, speed demon receiver. Again, there's only one football to go around. So I'm not sitting here saying he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver, but you have to imagine everybody's going to be shading towards Luther. And then with their additional coverage, they're going to be looking at Theo Wees. But a speed demon like Johnson, who's already made plays at this level, again, it may not be fair how many weapons Missouri has to work with. So I'm going with 2 somewhat under the radar weapons that I think could have really, really big years for the Tigers.
Good call. And Marquise Johnson, I think we saw this last year that, like you said, speed demon. I mean, if you average about 30 yards a catch, you're probably doing something right. Even if you only have 13 catches, I think that's a good sign for Missouri. And again, just sort of solidifying this team is loaded at receiver. I mean, I sort of was chuckling when you were talking about taking a receiver. I was just like, yeah, Luther Burden's really good, Mike. We don't have to pick him as a breakout. We know. But yeah, I think Marquise Johnson, Brett Norfleet just adds to the weapons that Brady Cook has in 2024.
All right, how about Oklahoma, Steven? Sticking with that rivalry that they keep telling me is not a rivalry. But who you got as a breakout candidate for the Sooners?
I'll start with the obvious, Jackson Arnold. I think he's due for a breakout season. One of my top breakout quarterbacks, along with Connor Wigman this year and Garrett Nussmeier. So Jackson Arnold, we saw the potential in the Alamo Bowl. I think he'll clean up some of those mistakes and take a big step forward this year. So I like Jackson Arnold. I also like Peyton Bowen, the safety. A lot of National Signing Day drama, in 2023, and we know Billy Bowman is one of the top safeties. If Peyton Bowen can take a big step forward, all of a sudden you're looking at maybe one of the better safety pairings in college football this year. So give me Peyton Bowen and Jackson Arnold as breakout candidates.
Yeah, nice selections there, Stephen. I don't know if this is fair, but I just said the entire offensive line because
That's fair. Yeah.
That's all they tell me is they got the world's greatest offensive line coach down there. But one specifically that I continue to hear is just looks like a man amongst boys down there, and I always butcher his name. Perhaps you can help me here, Stephen. Fabichi Nawawu. Is that even close?
That's close, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, North Texas, I believe he transferred in from. But again, they're gonna have a lot of different combinations. Maybe that it sounds like they're still trying to figure that out. But he is going to be a starter for Oklahoma. But again, I think it's the entire offensive line. If they get that solved, heck, they could have one of the better offenses, not only in the SEC, but the entire country. It remains a question mark. I know they're fully bought in down there, but again, if they get that solved, people are severely underrating the Sooners.
Lots of weapons at receiver, healthy, potentially group of running backs this year. One name I also circled, and bear with me here, but Adabarwe, PJ Adabarwe at defensive end. When I think about Brent Venables, I think Clemson defense, and I think about all of those great defensive lines and defensive ends. I mean, it was year over year. You lose defensive ends, the next wave is ready to emerge. And I don't know they're quite there yet at Oklahoma, but they're getting there. And we saw this last year. I mean, he was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He just played a little bit, 6 tackles. But he could be a guy who really makes that kind of second-year jump, especially as Oklahoma goes into the SEC. And they're going to need some guys like that to step up. So give me also Adabarwe off the edge, just maybe a breakout defender for OU this year.
Hey.
Thanks, cuz.
One more from Cousin Rick. Man, what a guy. He says, I hope Texas A&M and Texas will both be 10-1 heading into that last regular season game. Winner goes to the SEC title game and the college football playoff game. All gig 'em. Appreciate you, Cousin Rick. But let me throw this at you, Stephen. Again, I realize you're not predicting them to go 10-1 today or anything like that. But let's say Cousin Rick's scenario does play out. A&M's 10-1, Texas 10-1. I think it's safe to assume Texas loss would be, let's just say Georgia, but it could be Oklahoma, it could be Michigan, but I think most realistically in this scenario would be Georgia. Would you say that's fair?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, and then let's flip it the other way though, and says A&M is 10-1. So whatever question mark, Stephen, you may have about the Aggies, it's safe to assume they've answered a lot of these. And the defense is probably elite. Like Cousin Rick says, maybe the best pass rush in not only the SEC, but the entire country. They got a 3-headed monster at running back. Connor Wigman's healthy. Again, these are a lot of, what ifs. But if they're 10-1, all these are probably come true. Who are you picking in that ball game, Stephen? 10-1 in College Station. Do not make Cousin Rick upset here.
Mike, I have been leaning A&M in that game this offseason. I sort of subscribe to this theory in college football that is like the moment, and sort of like it's just the right moment, right timing for teams, like we saw with Tennessee beating Alabama 2 years ago up in Knoxville. And the way that A&M and Texas game is shaping up to be, the fact that A&M gets Texas in its first season in the SEC, revenge on its mind too, because Texas won the last one. The conditions favor A&M. And if that's the records, that's probably where I will lean, but slightly, because I think both these teams are really good. So.
And I'm shaking my head because Cousin Shane's down here saying Texas. I don't know what A&M, well, actually, I do know what A&M did to him. He's hyped them up insanely the last 3 years, so they've just destroyed all that. So I get the burnt, but the fact that Texas, that cousin Shane saying Texas, that's a gift that every A&M fan should be celebrating today.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Is cousin Shane going to be on the Texas hype video like he was from Missouri last year?
I don't know if they got a drum down there in Austin, but he'll bang it for you.
Get cousin Shane the golden hat after the Oklahoma game, right?
No, that's a good one. All right, how about South Carolina, Steven? Breakout candidates for the Gamecocks.
All right. I apologize in advance for going super easy here, but I like Lenore Sellers as a breakout candidate. He was just too promising in limited action. And also, whether it's just buzz or whether it's just chatter, the chatter around him this summer and fall has been really promising about taking the next step as just an overall player. I do think it is going to be a work in progress, certainly as a passer, but just the skill set, the tools, they're all there. For Lenore Sellers. So give me Lenore Sellers as one. I also like Jalen Kilgore in the defensive backfield for South Carolina. 11 starts last year. He was on the freshman All-America team, 76 tackles. Certainly took some lumps as South Carolina's secondary did at times last year. But whether you slot him in at nickel or you slot him in at safety somewhere in that secondary, I think he's going to emerge as a really nice player for South Carolina this year.
Yeah, I also went Kilgore on the defensive side of the football. I love the pick of Lenore Sellers. That certainly could be the case. I think Rocket Sanders seemed like an obvious one, so I could have went there as well if he regains his form. But how about, again, this might be a little obvious as well, Stephen, but the fact that South Carolina's got so many breakout candidates, I think that's good for the Gamecocks. How about Nick Harbor?
Yeah.
Who started 5 games, made an impact, didn't quite live up to the 5-star billing, but again, the fact that he's on the field making plays right out the gate, maybe I just contradicted myself, but I think sometimes, you hope you get a 5-star, you're getting Randy Moss 2.0, but that's just not reality. It just takes time, particularly someone that has a track background and just learning the intricacies of being a receiver at this level. So if Nicholas Harbor has taken that next step in his game, watch out. He could be one of the most dynamic playmakers in all the country this season.
I totally agree with you, Mike. I think he's definitely like one of those wild card players that if he reaches or sort of just starts to scratch the surface of his potential, like what could that mean for Lenore Sellers? Like it would be a go-to guy. It would be a significant boost to this passing game because when you look at what South Carolina has at receiver, I think they've got a really solid, just a collection like Jared Brown, the Coastal Carolina transfer, I think is going to be a nice player. Gage Laveridan from Miami of Ohio also as well. It doesn't feel like there's a number one guy here yet. And Luke Doty's in that mix too as the converted quarterback and receiver. So they really could use the Xavier Leggett, and maybe it is Nick Harper. And if it's not maybe all the way there, if he just starts to scratch that potential, that's huge for the South Carolina offense. So I like the talent plus potential plus opportunity equal in a breakout year as well for Nick Harper.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about Tennessee? No wonder Cousin Shane's hanging out in the comments. He's waiting for us to do the Vols. Who you got as breakout candidates for Tennessee, Stephen?
I know you guys both are going to roast me, but I got to go with Nico, right? I mean, it's just too obvious. He's due for a massive season in his first year as the starter. So Nico is by far, I think, one of my top breakout players just in the SEC for this year. But outside of that, I think Tennessee's got an offensive lineman in Lance Hurd that is going to be a massive, massive pickup from the transfer portal. Sort of underrated, probably. He stuck behind 2 great tackles at LSU, so he transferred to Tennessee. He could really shine at left tackle. So give me Lance Hurd. And also on defense, give me Arian Carter at linebacker. We know Keenan Peely sort of penciled in as one starter. I like Tennessee's defensive line, really deep at defensive tackle, plus James Pierce. If Carter steps up at linebacker, that defensive front for Tennessee is going to be maybe even better than we think this preseason.
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it right there, Stephen. I went Arian Carter on the defensive side of the football. I continue to pump up his defensive line, and by all accounts, they have lived up to it, at least that billing in fall camp. They look the part, so that's going to clear the way for Keenan Pili and Arian Carter to make tremendous production this fall on Rocky Top. But how about this, Stephen? This is like a forgotten man over here. He just started to make an impact. And again, I don't know why I'm the only one that seems to be so focused on this, but it seems to be accurate. I don't get many things right, but I think I got this one, Stephen. We all get enamored. The incoming transfer, Chris Brazzell. I keep hearing Chris Brazzell, and I hope he's great. He may be. He freshman All-American at Tulane. He may be the next great receiver at Tennessee. But I heard the same thing last year, Stephen, about Dante Thornton. And he really started to come on, and then he got injured last year. So year 2 for Dante Thornton, he's my pick as a breakout receiver for Tennessee. Knowing the system a little bit better, knowing his role. He's got help with Brew and Squirrel. They don't need Dante Thornton to come in there and dominate. And heck, even if he can't, they got guys like Brazzell and Mike Matthews, the freshman, and Chaz Nimrod and Webb. I mean, they got all kinds of weapons. So there's no pressure on Dante Thornton to be that guy. But I think year 2, I think he may even have a better year than Chris Brazzell this year. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
I like the collection of Tennessee receivers. Sometimes when you're trying to fill out the All-SEC ballot, trying to figure out which one you like the most to get to All-SEC honors or who you like to be that number one guy. But I think you nailed it, Mike. I mean, McCoy, White, Brazzell, Dante Thornton, some of the other guys. Like Tennessee's receiving core is really deep, and they may not have a first-team All-SEC selection, but they have depth. And you look at Thornton's numbers last year. 6 catches, 6 of his 13 catches kind of came right before he got hurt. So he really was coming on for this Tennessee offense last season.
Right. Yeah. Just unfortunate that he got hurt right at that moment.
Yeah.
But all right. Last but not least here, Stephen, Vanderbilt. They got any breakout candidates there on the West End?
It might be obvious, but I think we got to go with Ced Alexander at running back. He led the team in rushing last year. I think just from a talent and also the opportunity. New Mexico State had 3 players that ran for over 500 yards last year. One of those was Diego Pavia, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities for running backs in this system. So I like Ced Alexander to have a breakout year. And over on defense, I think keep an eye on Dante Carter. He's a freshman defensive back. He's made some noise this preseason. Maybe he's a guy who could compete for a starting job. We know one of the transfers that Vanderbilt brought in is not going to play this year. So even more of a chance that Dante Carter makes an impact in his freshman season.
How about this one, Stephen? Quincy Skinner, receiver. They've lost so many weapons via the transfer portal. Someone's got to step up. Again,
it's tough.
It's kind of like what's that old? I don't even know what they call those. But if a big tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it. Right. I mean, Quincy Skinner could have a heck of a year. Maybe no one will pay attention. But so star is maybe too big of a word. But breakout production. Give me Quincy Skinner.
Somebody's going to catch passes, right? I mean, it's right. It's going to be Quincy Skinner, or it could be one of the other. I know they brought in a couple transfers, Fungi from Texas Tech. So, I think I would probably take Skinner of all the guys in Vanderbilt's receiving core to maybe lead the team. And of course, Will Shepherd, London Humphreys, and Jade McGowan was a pretty promising trio last season for Vanderbilt. Unfortunately, they all play for different teams next year.
Right. I mean, just imagine how fun would that offense be with those 3 receivers and Diego Pavia throwing the football.
Right. Talk about a much improved offense, having those weapons at receiver, a competent offensive coordinator, and a better quarterback. Yeah, I think Vanderbilt will be in a lot better shape.
All right, Stephen. So, hey, we hit on all 16 SEC teams. Anything to close us out? Any thoughts you got?
One reminder about the Athlon Sports college football preseason guide. I know the season is getting close, but you still have a chance to pick it up, athlonsports.com. And also, I did spot it out in the wild on the newsstand at a grocery store this week. So if you're still looking at Kroger or Publix, it looks like they're starting to pop up there now. It's the Athlon Sports 2024 college football preview magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. Help support Stephen and the Athlon crew over there, all the hard work they put in. And you can always check out the Athlon Sports College Football magazine on their website as well, and order it there or on Amazon. So, again, Stephen, can't thank you enough for all this hard work you put into this show. Really adds something and mixes it up between Cousin Shane and I, just drinking and laughing and doing all that. So, again, thank you, Stephen. Thank you to each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you back with another episode tomorrow. But until then, we'll catch you all in the next one.